Judge Bridges,
Yes.
I just wanted to let you know, I know we don't usually do roll call beyond the task force members, but it appears that Judge Bedore and Judge Henry are on the line as well, so I just wanted to make sure you knew they were there.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is now 2:00 p.m., so I will open the meeting. My name is Don Bridges. I serve as co-chair together with Judge Jay Corpening of this task force. I'd like to welcome everyone to our meeting this afternoon. And today we begin our meeting with a special event. As we talk about the world in which we have lived during recent weeks and how to respond to our current situation, there's one word that seems to pop up time and time again, and that is the word uncertainty. In the midst of that uncertainty, however, there is at least one area of certainty, and that is the certainty of leadership being demonstrated by the Chief Justice of the North Carolina Supreme Court during this crisis. We are honored to have with us today the Honorable Sherry Beasley, the Chief Justice of our North Carolina Supreme Court. Thank you, Madam Chief Justice, for joining us today, and we appreciate and welcome any comments you would like to make to the group at this time.
Well, thank you, which is my first comment. I cannot thank you all enough for your willingness to come together to be a part of this COVID-19 task force to make recommendations to me about how we should expand the access to our courts going forward. I especially would like to thank Senior Resident Superior Court Judge Don Bridges and Chief District Court Judge Jay Corpening. You all have been phenomenal. I've had a chance to review these recommendations. I understand that there are more forthcoming, and I certainly look forward to seeing those. I know everybody has a lot of questions throughout our courts about how we will go forward, and not just throughout our courts. I know lawyers and the public are also wondering how this is going to happen. And so your recommendations really are foundational to how it is I think about doing this work. I can tell you that there will be at least an order and possibly two coming forward within the next week or two. And I've really tried not to hide the ball. I really do want everybody to know where we are and where we might be headed. And so I have been speaking with lawyer groups and a whole host of other folks to let them know and allow them to ask questions. But I want you to know that your work has really been fundamental in helping me to relay the information about what's happening in our courts. And I just thank you so much for your willingness to serve in this way. I'm certainly glad to answer any questions if you have them at this time.
Are there any questions for Chief Justice Beasley? Thank you again, Madam Chief Justice. We certainly appreciate your time to be with us today, and we appreciate your remarks.
Well, I appreciate you all so much. There is a lot to think through. As I look at this first set of recommendations that you've offered, I will tell you one of the things I'm trying to think through for myself is how do we logistically make sure that our courts are not overrun with people on June the 1st? I think it's a safety issue. I think it's a public health issue. And I'm sure that in some part, there must be coordination with local sheriffs to help sort of figure that out. But I know you're thinking through these very important issues as well. But I will tell you, as lawyers and judges and other folks are reaching out to me literally daily, there is a bit of angst, as you well know, around what happens next. And so, if you would, as you think through how logistically we go forward, that would be helpful for me to think about.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Well, I appreciate you all. Thank you again so very much for your hard work. These are big issues. We've not been in a pandemic before. And I can't thank you enough for your forethought, your considerations around every single aspect of running courts, and your thoughtfulness around the safety and hearing matters that we've not been able to hear, and the sense of urgency around people's needs to have their matters addressed. So thank you all so much for all you do. I'm available going forward if you ever have any questions or would like to discuss these very important matters. So thanks so much for everything.
Thank you, ma'am.
I'll take care.
At this time, we will move into other aspects of the business portion of our meeting. Before doing that, I would like to remind everyone, as is our custom, that this is a public meeting. This meeting is subject to North Carolina's open meeting laws, and this meeting also has been made available to the public through a live stream. Because this is an open meeting, if you are joining us only by audio and not by video, please identify yourself as you begin speaking during the course of making comments in the meeting. At this time, I believe that Emily Mehta is prepared to take a roll call of those members of the task force who are present at this meeting. Emily, could you do so, please?
Yes, sir. Judge Bridges, you're here. Judge Corpening?
I'm here.
Judge Sermon? Judge Sherman, can you hear me?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah,
Can you hear? I'm sorry.
All right.
I'm muted.
that's all
Sorry.
right. Judge Vincent? Judge Vincent? I don't see her on the list. I'll come back to her. Mr. West?
Here.
Mr. Evans? Is Mr. Evans present?
Here. I'm here.
Johnson?
Here.
Clerk Chingary?
Here.
Kinsley Craig?
Here.
Kelly Myers?
Here.
Mr. Cheek?
Here.
Jennifer Harjo?
Here.
Mr. McCabe?
Here.
Mr. Harrison?
Here.
Mr. Weed?
Here.
Mr. Keister?
Here.
Is Judge Vincent on yet? And Mr. West?
Here.
So it looks like we're just missing Judge Vincent then.
All right. Thank you, Emily. By now, each of us should have received a copy of the minutes from our last meeting on May 5th. Are there any additions or corrections to those minutes?
Your Honor, the only thing I noticed was it didn't seem to reflect the final vote that we took on the recommendations that we discussed.
All right. Is there someone that has the details of that vote that can report that on the record at this time?
I'm sorry, Wade, I just wanted to clarify, do you mean the email vote after the meeting?
Yes, ma'am. I thought the email vote was basically a continuation of the meeting.
Okay, I thought I added that, but I may have just forgotten to do so, so I will add that.
Danielle, what was the numerical division of that
The
vote?
vote was 15-1 to approve all of the recommendations in what was submitted to the Chief Justice, with Kelly Myers dissenting solely because of the postmark issue, as I understood it.
So, Mr. Harrison, is your request a motion that be added to the minutes?
Yes, sir. I move that the procedure and the result of that vote be added to the minutes.
Are there any other additions or corrections to the minutes? Mr. Harrison, could we amend your motion to make that also a motion to approve those minutes then as amended?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do we need a second to that motion?
This is Jennifer Harjo. I would second.
All right. Once again, please take a roll call vote on approval of those minutes.
Judge Bridges,
Yes.
Judge Corpening,
Yes.
Judge Sturman, Judge Sturman, Judge Sturman, can you hear us now?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Mr. West,
Yes.
Mr. Evans,
Yes.
Clerk Johnson,
Yes.
Clerk Chingary,
Yes.
Kinsley Craig,
Yes.
Kelly Myers,
Yes.
Mr. Cheek,
Yes.
Ms. Harjo,
Yes.
Mr. McCabe,
Yes.
Mr. Harrison,
Yes.
Mr. Weed,
Yes.
Mr. Keister.
Yes.
That's everyone, Judge Bridges?
Thank you, ma'am. We have heard the Chief Justice speak already about concerns of what things are going to be like on June 1st. And so at this time, I would like to call upon Judge Corpening to address that very issue.
Thank you, Judge Bridges. Her remarks were certainly timely in the conversations that Judge Bridges and I have been having. It's in the conversations we're having with other folks. It's clear that we need to be very direct in our messaging about what's going to happen on June 1. I've heard from lawyers in my district that they're very concerned that all of a sudden we're going to have courtrooms full of people. And so I think it's important for us as a task force to be clear in our messaging that we are preparing to expand court functions June 1. And some of our conversation later in the agenda is going to address that specifically. But But I actually think it's important that we recommended the chief that she be clear in her message about expanding court functions. That doesn't mean we're going to go from 0 to 100. That we're going to look at expanding case types, that we're going to follow public health protocols, that we're going to use physical distancing in the courtrooms. I'll share with you that in the conversations that our chief district court judges all over the state are having every week, courtrooms are being measured in many of our courthouses now for 6-foot physical separation of everyone who comes into a courtroom, and they're readjusting capacity for those rooms so that folks can feel safe when they come. So we wanted to start today's meeting with a conversation and invite any of you to weigh in on the messaging, what this should look like, whether we should make a recommendation to the Chief Justice about that quickly. My concern is that lawyers across the state are voicing their concerns about this. And so Judge Bridges and I are interested in your input on this. Judge Bridges, I'll give it back to you for other thoughts you have on this issue.
And thank you, Judge Corfing. And we keep talking about words that keep resurfacing. And one of the words that I think we will all use a lot today is going to be messaging. And that indeed needs to be something of which all of us have to be mindful, not only in putting together our work within this task force, but also in our work in our individual districts, getting clear messages out to other court officials and also getting clear messages out to the public. And so as we go about this work, it occurs to me that is a very big part of what we have to be focused on as we go about this work, is in sending the right kind of messages both to our court officials and to the public.
This is Waylon. Good afternoon. I've been fortunate enough to have had court all 3 days in 3 different counties and done right much work, both custody and non-custody. And a theme that I'm hearing from all the lawyers is that all the defendants think that there's no need for them to have to agree to come to court because they'll never get to a jury trial this year and witnesses will fade away and these charges will eventually be dismissed. Messaging is important, but I think that we need to move towards a product in June, July, before we ever even consider doing jury trials in August, that says that no, we're not closed, the courts aren't closed, we're here, and encourage the lawyers and the assistant district attorneys to work on the schedules for holding court, time limits, our time slots. And sometimes if the lawyer says, well, I don't know if I can get them to come, and they say, well, it would be helpful if we didn't have a choice. And it would be helpful if they don't have choices. So the message needs to be that we're open and we're going to be starting to do business more and more. And when your case comes to court, you need to come to court because your case will be heard and the witnesses will be available and you'll have to answer for them at some point. And this plea bargain is not going to get better. I just think it's important that we move towards that as quickly as possible, even if the carry through is slow. I did 12 pleas Monday. It took all day long. I got out at 5 o'clock. I didn't have ever more than 10 people in the courtroom. And, you know, small counties are a whole lot easier to do, but I think that would help the lawyers. I think it would help the public's confidence in what we're doing. And the other message is, I find that if everybody has on a mask and gloves, that you don't hear a peep out of anybody about I'm scared. You have a lot of people wandering around without the precautions, or you don't have social distancing. You have a lot of people say, I don't know if I want to come or not. So that's why it's important to do all that.
Thank you for that. This is Jay Corping again. Other comments from members?
Judge Corpening, if I might, this is Jennifer Harjo. I mean, I will admit I never cease to be impressed with Justice Beasley's words, and I thought the comments she made today were excellent, and I hope that we will strive for that. I think it is important to tell the public and let the lawyers know that we are going to increase the responsibilities and the activity of the court. It's important to our clients. It's important to the defendants to have their cases heard. A lot of them are sitting in jail just waiting to have something done. At the same time, it's important for the safety of everybody that we make some reasonable decisions about what is going to be heard, what needs to be heard, what does not need to be heard immediately, and how we're going to accomplish that safely. And I share the comment that was just made as well. Fortunately, I was in court before Judge Corpening today, and I noticed the courtroom was full of people that appeared to be taking this seriously, and they were safe and they were wearing masks. But that's not every day. Sometimes I'm in court and nobody seems to be accepting the responsibility that they have to keep others safe. So those are concerns I have. I have concerns about inmates coming in from the jail and infecting lawyers or other people. And so I just hope that we carry forward from today by making sure we make those precautions for everybody and not rush too fast in this process.
This is Patrick Weed. To follow up on what Ms. Harjo said, I agree completely about the need and importance of having protective equipment like masks and gloves. I guess one question is, do we know whether or not each courthouse will have those supplies available for members of the public who come to court and come into the courthouse, perhaps at the security area, and do not have those items with them? I think that would be one thing we could potentially include in a recommendation as to how to deal with that situation. In addition, my primary areas in Wake County, I understand that there will be an administrative calendar beginning June 1st in Superior Court, but the defendants will only be required to come at their designated time, that we will not have a full regular calendar call any week in June in Superior Court. I believe that Johnston County, I understand, I think is doing something similar to that Superior Court. I have not heard yet in Wake and some other areas what the plan is for June for District Court. I think that some of the cases that were initially continued in late March and April were set for sometime in June. To know what, communicate a message to individuals with or without an attorney, particularly for District Court, about whether they're all supposed to appear on their court date or right now, whether those are going to be moved out more, how the district attorney's offices throughout the state will be handling those calendars for matters that are currently set in District Court in June.
Thank you, Mr. Weedy. I can answer the mask question. My county provided me a box of 50 masks about 4 weeks ago and told me that I had to make it last. I don't see AOC having a supply of masks to provide to counties. Gaston County, on the other hand, provided John Greenlee, their chief district court judge, with several thousand masks. But when you think about courthouse traffic in a day, several thousand may last a day. It may last 2 days. So that's a great point by both you and Ms. Harjo. Other comments from the group about this?
Judge Corpening, it's Kelly Myers, and I just wanted to add that issues like that we are addressing with the Best Safety Practices Working Group. So as those come up, please feel free to shoot an email to me and we can add them to our list of questions. And I'll give more of an update later, but just so you know.
Thanks very much.
Yes, sir.
Other comments from the group on this issue?
Judge Corpening, this is Elisa Chingari in Mecklenburg County. I speak from the county that has had the most positive tests, who has had positive tests at both the courthouse and the jail. whose numbers are rising daily as other counties are flatlining, who's had limited number of deaths, which I'm very appreciative of. I am very concerned that people hear June 1 as a rush to the courthouse. I want them to hear it as a soft opening. I want them to hear it as limited foot traffic. I want them to understand that they are still encouraged to mail filings and not to flood the courthouse. I am also being very vocal about limited staffing in the clerk's office. Between vacancies, between high-risk employees, between just everyday life, I am down 65 positions, which represents 30% of my workforce. As you could imagine, we cannot return to full operations. Even soft operations will pose some challenges with that kind of deficit. So I bring that to this group's attention because we have to put forth directives that all counties can bring to bear.
Thank you. Great points. Comments from other members of the task force?
Judges Billy West in Fayetteville. Just a couple anecdotal things. First, there has been some questions from our group about, can we legally require face masks? Right now in Cumberland, we're requiring them, in the courthouse, unless you're in your own office or a place where you can social distance. But, we really don't have a lot of the public coming in right now. So we haven't had to address the issue of, what happens when a lot of people start coming in June 1st or whenever that would be, requiring those masks. And is there any legality problem there if we're not able to produce them? As to the traffic court, I think Mr. Weed was asking, here in Cumberland, some of our heavier traffic administrative days, we're going to try to delay those at least a few more weeks and deal with our kind of basic days with social distancing and things that we think we can do in each courtroom. So kind of a soft opening, if you'll call it, on June 1st is what Judge King has been calling for and Judge Pone here. But that was just one question we had from the larger group of DAs about the PPEs. Is there a legality issue if it's not provided there? I mean, can you or should you turn somebody away that doesn't have that?
Thank you. That's a great question. The Chief District Court judges are meeting every week, and that has been a topic of our conversations as well. You tell somebody they have to come to court, but then you turn them away if they don't have a mask and you can't provide one, creates some challenges. Judge Sermons, are the folks who are coming to your proceedings bringing their own masks, or are you able to provide them?
We are able to provide them if they don't have them. We don't have a lot of numbers though. We have them 5, 10, 15 people. It's not like a big mass like district court. So, and it's just right now the low hanging fruit, the easy cases, but I think there's room for non-custody hearings for people that can get their case moving along, get it set on a trial date in the fall.
Judge Corbening, this is Elisa Chingari once again. We've all given some attention to occupancy, safe occupancy of a courtroom and the number of people that can occupy the space. I want us to also lend some voice to the occupancy of the courthouse. We've been talking with our public director along those lines. When people feel as though the clerk's office is open, so I can come to the courthouse for business, we are not kind of setting the same standard for being in an open public space. And there needs to be some voice given to occupancy. We tracked our traffic in Mecklenburg during the month of April. It totaled 4,000. So that's quite a few people on a daily basis coming in the courthouse when we are operating at limited hours. So I think that it's one thing to manage the number of people in any given courtroom space, but that does not bring to bear corridors and open clerk windows and those kinds of things. So it deserves some attention.
Thank you for that. And I'm sure Kelly Myers made a note about that for her committee, because they're certainly looking at best practices for safety. Thank you for those comments. Any other comments from the task force about this issue?
And one more comment or question. Chief Justice Beasley mentioned the logistics June 1 and going forward. I think part of the directions may need to be for the sheriff's department or whoever provides security at each courthouse facility to ensure social distancing, the security lines. Typically, whether attorneys have to go through or not, everyone's sharing the same bowls to put their keys, cell phone, and everything in. And that would not seem to, unless somebody's wiping them down after every single person through, that seems to be a logistical area that needs some consideration in order to probably something for the best practices group.
Thank you. I'm not sure I'll ever look at a piece of paper the same way again. Other comments from the group?
Yes, this is Marcia Johnson. I'm clerk in Harnett County. I just had a regional meeting in Jacksonville with some area clerks, and we were talking about cooperation among all of the partners in a county. And it's my understanding that there are some counties that the sheriff's departments are not offering to assist with getting people in the courthouse. Some are wanting temperature checks. So there's a lack of cooperation, and if the sheriff's department or security, private security, does not do it, who's going to regulate that? It's fine in the courtrooms. We can say 30 people is all we can have in, but then we're going to have all those people in the corridors, downstairs, going out the front door, and who is going to maintain that? Because I'm afraid that there's going to be a temper problem with some of these people, when they're pushed, and I think that's going to be a problem, is a lack of cooperation among all of the partners.
Judge Corpening.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Sheriff Clemens, Richmond County. I don't know. I wouldn't say that it's as it pertains to the sheriffs. I don't think that it's a situation where they're not cooperating. I think it's an issue where, what is it that you're putting on us? Are you putting security on us? Are you putting the healthcare purpose on us also? What we have done here in Richmond County is we have collaborated with our health department. And when individuals are coming in based upon the temperature checks, the health department will do that. And we will concentrate on the security piece of it. Based upon that, every sheriff's office does not always have the extra personnel to usher these individuals in. So you're right, there is a policy that is going to have to be put into place, how you issue folks into the building, because our courtrooms and courthouses are built differently in all 100 states. I mean, all 100 counties, as far as how the movement takes place. As far as your loitering in the hallways and stuff like that, you have to consider getting in there. Folks that are having cases, do they need to bring family members with them? Is it just them coming into court with their attorneys to do it? So a lot of consideration has to be put into place how you're going to do the movement. But I can tell you from talking to the sheriffs and representing the association, that is a concern of the sheriffs. We're not healthcare people, so we should not have thermometers in our hands checking folks at the door. We're there to provide the security and make sure that the orderly fashion and maintaining the courtrooms is what's going on. So there is a more conversation that needs to be taking place. However, look at the health department and their partnership with the people that are coming into the building.
Thank you, Sheriff. And Johnson and Clerk Chingary, I'll share with you, and this is part of the work of our Technology Innovation Committee is to look at creative scheduling options, but part of the point of looking at that is to not have 300 people show up for a session of court and then just let 30 in at a time. The idea is to have 30 people come for a session of court and then 30 more for a next session of court. And then, so there's looking at ideas of a rolling calendar potentially. So I think that certainly that's something that committee needs to look at, and those are valid points. It doesn't help us if we have hallways full of people. It doesn't help us. So great points. Other comments from members of the group? All right, I think it's clear that what this looks like on June 1st is an important task for us, and that our messaging needs to be clear. Judge Bridges, anything else on this before we move on?
Not that I know of.
All right, this has been helpful, I think, because the subcommittees that have been able to hear these comments and can take them up in their work. So Judge Bridges, if you're ready, I can move on to the next item.
Yes, sir.
So one of our next big tasks, and this connects to lots of the comments that have been made, is to set priorities for case types as we expand our operations. And part of the conversation that Judge Bridges and I have had about this is how to frame these issues for consideration. And we've listed in the agenda several different items that I'll talk about in a minute, but I'll share with you that my work groups of district court judges, that's chief district court judges that have been looking at criminal cases, domestic cases, along with civil and juvenile cases, have struggled to some extent getting into the weeds with specific case types. Lots of struggles with criminal court in particular about that. Judge Vincent has served on one of those work groups. So what we thought we would do is first try to create a process for actually compiling and organizing information collected. As an example, our court managers met very, very quickly as soon as the task force was announced, and were able to provide to us a listing of priorities that was attached to our first agenda. The court managers may have continued to meet and work on that. Chief district court judges have worked on that. Superior court judges have worked on that. And so a thought that Judge Bridges and I and Danielle Carmen had was that we get each of these work groups to submit their work product to someone from AOC who can support our work, have that person filter all of those different recommendations to look for similarities and differences and catalog those for us, and then present that to us as a group instead of each of you having to go through all of those and figure out what's similar, what's not. So we thought that might be a good place to start in terms of looking at what all the various work groups have done. So I think that Judge Bridges and I are looking for some feedback from the task force about how you feel about approaching the process that way, because I know the clerks have been meeting, the managers have been meeting, the judges have been meeting, the district attorneys have been meeting. There, lots of different groups are concerned about this. So, Judge Bridges, is that a fair summary of what we're looking for?
I think so. And of course, one thing that is in the background of this whole issue is, please remember that unlike our best practices committee, our technology and innovations committee, and our virus fatigue committee, we don't have a specific committee assigned to the task of working on these priorities. So that's why we're talking about trying to formulate exactly what our best approach would be to the mechanism for compiling and generating of the end product of information that we receive from these various external work groups.
Can we turn to our managers that are on the call first and get your input about approaching the process that way?
Yes, sir. This is Kelly Myers, and I believe when Kinsley and I even first addressed the court managers, that was our vision, was that we would get information from them and their viewpoint. So really a court management standpoint. What do you need? What's everything you need from making sure trash has been picked up, to making sure someone knows to bring a water pitcher, to making sure the sheriff's office knows you need a bailiff. What is every little step you need to make a courtroom of X type run? And because that's sort of their area of expertise. But I think we did envision that information would be coupled with information from the DAs and their area of expertise, from the judges, district court and superior court. So I think it's a great idea to have all the information that we're gathering from our groups put together, because I would imagine that we're probably getting a lot of overlap of recommendations, and it may be easier for us to parse through and make some recommendations a lot more quickly. And Kinsley, I don't know if you want to add more to that.
No, I agree completely with what Kelly has just said. I feel like, with the court managers, we have a perspective in each different kind of court because it's all brought to us for various things throughout our working days and working weeks here. So I can speak on behalf of all of our court management staff that are in that working group that I'm sure that they would not have a problem taking a look and merging things together if that's the need.
Thank you. From the district attorneys, Mr. West.
Yeah, I think, most of our recommendations were in the, the document that we provided, but actually one of the DAs was just texting me that was listening in. And I think probably what we hear the most is just the need, if the task force or the Chief Justice is going to provide guidance in areas, that it needs to be sooner rather than later. And I know it's difficult for the task force, it's difficult for her, but that's kind of the thing I keep hearing. And I'm sure that's right to hear from Mr. Evans as well, but I know a couple have reached out to me, they kind of look to us, hey, what are you hearing? What's going to happen next, sort of thing. And, and I certainly don't have all the answers, that's for sure. But that, I think, most of our proposals as far as dates and how things should be done are pretty much in that document. But I think that's probably the thing I've heard the most is, just hoping to get some guidance at what can be done and can't be done sooner rather than later, because, things like for the clerks, for example, calendars have to go out and things like that for case settings in June and beyond. I'd ask Robert if he has anything to add to that too.
Maybe not. If he unmutes and speaks up, then glad to hear from him, obviously.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry. I thought I'd unmuted. I agree with what Billy just said. And we just need certainty as soon as reasonably possible. Obviously, you don't want to get into the weeds too fast, but the issue of jury trials is essential to our case management going forward. And so what I'm hearing is that was probably number one on the plate of many of our DAs. They want to know as soon as possible when we can begin to calendar those cases for trial, understanding that there are going to be a lot of things that precede that. And so I'm just echoing what Billy said, and our report, I think, pretty much covers everything else.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Input from anyone else on the process of actually compiling and organizing the information?
Judge Corpening, this is Don Bridges. I have a question I would like to direct back to the district attorneys, and I suppose to pose this to the group as a whole as well. And that is, it seems to me that one of the most challenging aspects of what we're being asked to do is to try and quantify what sort of time frame we're looking at for these various things to take place. One of the things that I really liked about the report we received from the District Attorney's Conference was the way that report quantified different categories of events in terms of phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, which I think is a helpful concept for us to use in our work as a whole. But the question that I would have for the district attorneys is, what, if any, suggestions using their model of phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, what, if any, suggestions do they have as to indicators or for lack of a better expression, what I've called trigger points for moving from phase 1 into phase 2 into phase 3?
And I'll add real quickly, Judge Bridges, for Mr. West and Mr. Evans. Judge Bridges is talking specifically, I think, about the work product that Ben David created out of the Best Practices Committee. He has just shared that with us. Was it last night? Just last night or the night before? I don't remember. But that's the document we're talking about.
Well, we also got a document from the Conference of District Attorneys.
Yes.
A good bit earlier in the process that talked in those terms as well.
Yes.
Yeah, I think they're fairly similar. I know that Mr. David and the team down in New Hanover put together a PowerPoint. I don't know if this group has it. I can certainly get it to you if not. But to answer your question, Judge, I believe what we tried to do is to marry the phases up to the governor's phases and the governor's guidelines. So, you know, when you see phase 1 in there, that'd be referring to kind of where we are right now, I guess, when things were relaxed a little bit on Friday. And then phase 2 would be, you know, when the governor goes to that, which presumably would be, you know, no sooner than probably Memorial Day weekend. But I think we tried to marry up our phases with the phases that the governor had set forth in his plan.
That's my understanding, and both reports are pretty much the same. The report that I circulated was a report generated by our Best Practices Committee.
Any follow-up on that, Judge Bridges?
Well, the question that prompts, I think, is how much of our work can we address in those terms? Is that possibly is that reasonably realistic for much of what we're doing to try and follow that same type of progress?
This is Jay Corpening again. I'll share with everyone my conversation with Ben David, who's my elected DA. I really liked the product that has been put out. I think he chairs the Best Practices Committee for the conference. So I like both the one that Mr. Evans circulated and his PowerPoint, which, by the way, we do have, and it is on the Kelly Myers. Will you tell the group what that is called, where you've got the documents?
Yes, sir. I saved that to, I created a shared Google folder for the best safety practices working group, and I saved it there. So I can get it out to everyone if we want to, but we figured, I sort of figured since that's what we're working on, I've saved it for that working group to discuss first.
Thank you. And I think that maybe, Judge Bridges, it would be great for for that subcommittee to take a look at what the trigger points need to be as we expand. I talked with Ben about it maybe not exactly tracking what the governor is doing, because I don't know that we're going to be prepared to have a courthouse full of people by mid-June. Especially listening to the concerns from Clerk Shengary and Clerk Johnson and others. But I certainly think that we need to look at what points we need to expand. I think you made a great point about the trigger points.
And Judge Corpening, this is Kelly Myers as well. I have not had a chance yet to review the plans of the other states that I believe Danielle Carmen said was on our task force website now. But those may also help serve us in just formatting at least our best practices. And if other states have gone to a similar phased approach that, as Judge Bridges suggested, that may be how we want to go.
Great, thank you. Anything else about the process of collecting this information from the various work groups?
Judge Corpening, this is Don Bridges again. One of the points that was raised in particular by the Superior Court work group is the fact that as we craft these priorities, many counties are going to have limited courtroom space, and our social distancing precautions are going to require us to have to expand our space as much as possible, which will almost inevitably lead to potential conflicts between the divisions of the trial court or between the different types of court that are going on for that limited and valuable courtroom space. So one of the issues that we need to be mindful of is suggested methods on how to go about resolving those conflicts. And of course, the easy answer to that question is communication. That the Superior Court judges and the District Court judges need to be talking with each other. But just as Rule 3.1 of the Rules of Practice provides a mechanism for trying to help resolve those conflicts with regard to scheduling when one lawyer is needed in multiple courts on the same day at the same time, who has priority for demanding the presence of that lawyer. It may be helpful to consider at least some sort of method of resolving those potential conflicts for that priority situation with regard to courthouse space or the types of cases that need to be addressed in order.
That's a great point. You know, those of us who work in larger counties take that space for granted because we've got rooms that are designated as superior courtrooms. We've got rooms designated as district courtrooms, and rarely do we have conflicts over space. But in lots of our counties, that conflict exists, and that's something the chiefs have been talking about as well. So we included that as, you know, one of the issues that we needed input on from the various work groups. Perhaps some variation of Rule 3.1 that can help us with coordinating priorities, how to resolve the conflicts over courthouse space, and then processing priorities of cases within our divisions. So that was our thinking about sort of the framework for these conversations. If we can get input from the various work groups to send that, and Judge Bridges, Danielle had volunteered someone at AOC to do that. Kelly Myers has said that maybe the managers could do that, or maybe that was not Kelly, but I'll blame Kelly. You know, either to the court managers or to AOC to assimilate all that information, you know, put the things together that are common denominators from all the reports, and give us the differences. What do you think about that?
Well, I certainly agree with that. But one important message to our task force as a whole on this is, like so much of our work, we're already running behind. It's very important that we receive this input from any of your working groups as soon as possible so that this information can be considered and included in our compilation of suggestions as to how to go about setting these priorities.
Great. Suggestion I've had, and I appreciate the offer from the managers, but you guys have got your plates really full right now.
Yes, sir. I would recommend AOC.
Okay.
Just to be clear.
Okay. I agree. So Danielle, we'll figure out who that can be and move forward on trying to get those reports in. I've got 2 of the 3 from district court. Have the 3rd on Friday, I think. I can go ahead and send that. Right. And one thing before we move off of this topic is we talk about setting priorities, and I'm going to steal a little bit of Judge Bridges' thunder because he made a comment that I really struck home for me, and I think we need to be mindful of this. We are not the COVID czars. We are making recommendations to the Chief Justice for her to provide guidance or to set rules in some cases, but it is important, and we need, and this is part of our messaging, it is important for us to emphasize that local stakeholders need to come together and work together to make it work for them. We have 100 different counties, and the folks who are the bosses of the realms in each of those counties need to be coming together and working together to make all of this fit for them. And our hope is that our task force can give guidance to the chief that she finds useful, that she can pass on. But at the end of the day, local folks have still got to meet and make it work for them, because we're certainly not the boss of them. We're not created to do that. We're not intended to do that. So since I stole your thunder, Judge Bridges, anything you want to add to the COVID czar?
Well, you did indeed, and that was something that I wanted to stress before the end of the day. So thank you for bringing that up. And that's a very important point.
Right, and then we'll make sure our work groups. Let's start with sending all that information into Danielle, and then Danielle, if you'll identify an appropriate person to filter for us on that.
And I would stress that we really need to receive that information within the next week. We need to have all of that information back from those work groups before our next meeting, so that we can start assimilating that information.
So any comments from the group about any of those points within setting priorities for case types as court sessions expand? It was not our vision to dive into the weeds on that today, but to get the information, to set a process, and then provide that product to everyone for your review before we have that conversation. But any other general comments about any of those bullet points under setting priorities?
Your Honor, my only comment is that I think this is a great step, but I think these other groups aren't going to stop meeting, and our group's not going to stop meeting. So if somebody could give some thought to how we can exchange information in more of a real-time fashion, I think that would help. I'm pretty much concluding that this is going to be a process, and the more information we have as we go along that we share, the better the common result's going to be.
Thank you. Thank
Judge
you.
Corpening, this is Don Bridges again. I would pose a question in that regard to Danielle. I know that we have established a number of files in which documents can be downloaded for this task force. Can we denominate a file for downloading of suggestions in this category?
We certainly can. I mean, if the purpose of this task force is to make recommendations to the Chief Justice for her to make recommendations or provide guidance, I'm not sure it's not premature for us to start sharing suggestions before they're shared with her. But we can certainly, I mean, my only concern about the only system we have right now, and TSD, I believe, is coming up with a potential solution to this. But the only system that we can establish right now is posting a folder on our website that is open to the public as well as task force members. We're trying to find a way to share documents with non-judicial branch employees, which is the limitation that we're struggling with right now. But it's my understanding that TSD has a potential solution, and that may be one avenue.
Mr. Harrison, maybe I misunderstood your question. Is that the sort of resource that you were asking about, a place that we could share that information?
Well, my comment stems from the work group meeting this morning. When we know that the Chief District Court judges, for example, have a group that has assigned work groups to various issues, the clerks are doing the same thing, and yet we find out about what progress has been made after some decisions have been made. There's nothing wrong with that, but you know, since we're all really looking into this and are digging into this individually as best we can, one person may have a solution for another person's problem. And not even know that it's the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing. So that was my thought. If people have been, if there have been minutes to these meetings that other groups have had, maybe share those, and at least we know what everybody's thinking about and worrying about, and it maybe puts a different spin on the real problems that we need to be solving, and how a solution for one problem may cause another problem. So that's my only thought. And I know it's abstract, and it has to be because I don't know what everybody else has been doing.
So, Mr. Harrison, I'll share with you that the groups that of Chief District Court judges that I asked to come together and work aren't making decisions about anything. They're trying to provide recommendations, and I'm happy to share that with everybody. And we I appointed them before this task force was created, and we shifted their role to be one of support for this task force. And so their recommendations will come in. They have, for example, some comments about creative scheduling, which will be relevant to the committee that met this morning. So we'll make sure that you have that. The larger process of looking at case type priority is really what we're looking at for all those groups to submit whatever work it is they've been doing, so that then one central person can filter and analyze and look for consistencies, inconsistencies, and then share all that information with us. But in terms of real time, I think that we can share whatever we need to with our working committees so that you've got that. Judge Bridges, don't you agree?
I do.
Does that address your thoughts?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
Right. Other comments from members about this issue of framing our work for priorities? All right, thank you all for your input then. Judge Bridges, I'll give it back to you.
No worries. I believe the next item on the agenda will be to receive reports from some of our committees that have started producing work product already. The first of those will be the Virus Fatigue Committee or Working Group, which is chaired by Jim Drennan. Jim, I believe you indicated you had some information to share with us.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'll give you a progress report. We don't have any final work product. It's a great group. We've met twice and are meeting again on Monday. In this question of sort of dealing with the emotional side of this virus and all of its weightiness that every single person has in their own unique recipe of stress, we're trying to figure out something that we can do fairly quickly, and then there's other things that we can do that may take a little longer. And on the fairly quick category, because people are there's a lot of sort of anticipatory angst right now about what's going to happen in the next few weeks. We want to try to get out at least one document of relatively short length that just tells people things they already know, things that they can find actually in lots of other places, but I'm not sure people are looking, and that they're not coming from the system itself. And so we're working on a document relying heavily on information from reputable sources like the Centers for Disease Control and the Mayo Clinic and local authorities to try to produce something. And then we haven't resolved yet exactly how to distribute that. There are a lot of different ways to think about that. Social media, memos from high officials in the court system, posting it on the website. We're still trying to sort through that. But there is a draft that I prepared and have sent to a small group. I'll get feedback from them, and then we'll take it to the whole group on Monday and see how that goes. We also are very interested in developing a really short video to sort of introduce this whole issue of you need to take care of yourself while you're taking care of other people and while you're doing this important work to foster the justice system across this state. And so to that end, there's another small working group that is trying to think through those issues and trying to develop a plan to do that. We'd love that to be done fairly quickly. So it probably won't be of Oscar nominations quality, but we think it can be very good. And so there were some really good ideas about ways to make that interesting and yet something people might watch. So those are the two things that we're doing immediately. Those are the highest priorities. Again, mostly about trying to provide keys to the doors to places people can get help if they need it, and to help people just be more aware that, especially people in the court system who often work sacrificially, that they need to think about themselves too, in sort of a self-help wellness mindset. So we want to get that information out. The second phase of this will be to access information that's already there. There's a lot of good information and good resources available through the AOC and through the system. We've heard from some people that it's not as easy to access that or in some ways there's just not an awareness that it's there. And so that's phase two, is to work through that and try to develop a better awareness for people that there are resources we already have. The bottom line is nobody's exempt. You know, if we worked in the meat industry, we'd be trying to do the same thing for people who are on the process lines. But we work in the court system, and so we're trying to respond to that particular need as best we can. So that's where we are. I'm enjoying working with this group. I'll be glad to answer any questions. We really want to get something done this month, if at all possible, at least on the document, and if we're lucky, the video.
Thank you, Jim. Are there questions for Mr. Drennan, his group?
And let me invite anybody else who's on that group to chime in. So we've got two clerks, Elisa and Marcia. Judge Vincent is on that group. We've got some people from outside this task force who we've sort of identified, including a representative from the AOC, two people from the AOC, who I don't think are on this call right now, but who've been very helpful as well. So, but for those people, the two clerks and the judge, if you have anything to say, please chime in, because they've been great.
Mr. Drennan, I think you covered all of the topics thoroughly. I would add that another thing that we are considering is not just the impact of COVID-19 as it relates to the virus, but also the rapid change that it's bringing about in our courts, the uncertainty, the use of technology and people's different varying levels of familiarity and comfort with that. So we know that as our court culture is changing, that too will be something that our court community, court personnel will need some help and support around.
And I would second that. I mean, when we emerge from this sort of long, bad dream, we're going to emerge into a different world, and people will have to live in that world as well. And there'll be some good innovations that come, but they won't come pain-free. So yes, thank you for that, Lisa.
Are there any other questions or comments to or from the virus fatigue committee? Let's move on then to the best practices or best safety practice committee. Kelly Myers is the chair of that group. Kelly, what would you like for us to know about your work so far?
So I'm a little jealous that Jim Drennan's group has already met twice, and I haven't wrangled my group yet. I'm trying to get some times and availability from people to meet on Monday. Part of that is behind the scenes. I wanted to take the time to gather and organize some information to send to our working group rather than sending them 10 separate emails. So I sent that out earlier today. If anyone on that working group did not receive an email from me or a separate email from me sharing the Google folder, please let me know privately, but or on here, it's fine. But I'm sort of thinking of this right now. We've broken it down into two areas, two, I guess, sort of shared working documents. One are public health questions. And so I've been receiving public health questions from a lot of the different sub court groups. So received a document of questions from Superior Court judges, and one that was compiled by the AOC, probably a bunch of questions that they had also just been writing down and receiving by email. And so really it's more right now asking, I mean, we have probably a 2-pager, and I tried to go in and organize those by, for example, facial coverings and masks, gloves, cleaning. So some of the broader topics, they are all the public health questions that I hope to have our public health expert help us answer those questions, which then should guide us into the second phase, which are those recommendations. I've received some recommendations from some groups and just some thoughts. We've got a great recommendation from the magistrates and sort of requests from them, and hoping that the answers to those public health questions can then help guide us in our recommendations for best safety practices, and using other states as a template. So that's kind of where we are. I've sent them a lot of resources and information and wanted to give them a little bit of time to go through all that before we meet on Monday.
Thank you for that. Are there questions for Kelly?
Teresa Vincent here from County. Do you know, is there anything in your materials as it relates to a recommendation to have the health department representatives to come to the courthouse and actually visit the courtroom so that they can determine or give a recommendation as to how many individuals the courtroom could hold or should hold safely in terms of social distancing?
I'm not sure if it's specific to the public health department, but that is in the materials. There are several counties that are doing that. It may be I can only speak for myself, and I think Mecklenburg. I know that both of us have had our county personnel, our general services director and her staff in Wake County have come in and done diagrams for all of our courtrooms with the maximum capacity and traffic flow. I don't know who those other individuals would be in other counties, but that is a topic that's on the list. One of the, I believe it may have been the Superior Court judges recommended that we include that as a best practice recommendation, and that it probably be a single source. So if it's your public health department or whoever we identify that should be doing that. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly, for that work. You all got, obviously, you've got a big assignment. There are so many points that need to be addressed in that area. So
Yeah, and I just would welcome Judge Bridges and Judge Corpening, any feedback that anyone on this call gets or any questions they have. If they want to send them to you or to me or to Danielle Carmen and she can shoot them to me. That way, I don't want a question to go unanswered and sort of get a couple months down the road and realize, oops, that was a big one we probably should have addressed.
All right, thank you very much. Anything further from that work group or for that work group at this time? I think it was Jim Drennan that used the phrase a while ago that when we emerge from the current pandemic, we're going to be living in a different world, and certainly that is the case. That we're going to be doing things in a different method from what we've done in the past, and for that we have the technology and innovation work group. Judge Chuck Henry has chaired that group, or is chairing that group. We reorganized that group at our last meeting, so we put them under a handicap by doing that in some sense. But nonetheless, I believe that Judge Henry has some information that he planned to report today. Is Judge Henry on the line and available?
Judge Bridges, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. Again, we met for the first time this morning, and some of your task force members were on that. So I'll say a brief, and then they can add to it. We basically tried to figure out what our future considerations were going to be. So we divided it into 3 different categories. One is immediate, a list of recommendations regarding technology and innovation, be ready by the June 1st deadline, and then progress to another group of issues for the next, let's say, 60 to 90 days, 120 days, and the third group would be further into the future. So the next meeting is Monday. We're going to consider these imminent recommendations. By then, we've got a list. Judge Bador was kind enough to listen to our conversations and make a list of things that we're going to take up next time, and the other members were invited to add to that list or comment on that list, and they have. I think we asked them if they would kindly do that by the end of this work week, so that we could take it up on Monday or Tuesday when we're meeting again. So I'll defer to the other members who are so helpful this morning in trying to get us some direction in our meeting and future. I'll defer to them now.
Just to keep things moving, this is Alan Bador. Nothing to add. Thank you.
Other comments from other members of that working group? All right, folks, thank you very much for each of those reports. And I think each of these chairs is hitting the ground running. we've still got a lot of work to do in all three areas, obviously. Our next item on the agenda, some of which we have touched on already, messaging and communications to the field. Judge Corpening has mentioned already the fact that we need to communicate that we're simply trying to formulate recommendations. We're not trying to act as overseers or we're certainly not planning to issue any directives to any local court officials as to how they operate. One of the things that I'm constantly reminded of as we have these discussions is how there are so many good ideas out there that come from all sources. And it's very important for each of us to remember that our service on this task force does not necessarily make us create any expertise on our parts as to how things should be done. We have a great number of very talented people that are part of our court system throughout the state that have a wealth of ideas that they can share with us. And I think it's very important for us to be seeking that information, listening to that information as we go about our work. But I will entertain any comments that or questions that anyone might want to offer at this regard as to points that we need to be mindful of in putting together our end product and what sort of information should be included in our final report. What are the areas that need to be communicated to the local court officials and to the public for that matter? Jim, I see your hand, but I don't hear anything.
I wasn't trying to raise my hand. Sorry.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
That's all right. You did see my hand, but it was not intended to communicate anything.
Okay. I'm sorry.
That's all right. No, good eyes.
Thank you.
Oh, by the way, Kinsley Craig is also on our committee, and she's done a great job, and I wanted to make sure I was able to remember her as well. And if she has anything to say about our committee, and she now wants to say it, I would invite her, but otherwise, I just wanted to thank her.
Oh, thank you. My comment isn't specific to the virus fatigue subgroup, but one thing to answer Judge Bridges' question that if we could communicate with the field as well as the public, this is something none of us have ever had to deal with before. So I think as long as everyone is willing to be patient with one another and have that clear line of communication with one another, things, even though they may seem or appear as if they are not working, that we try to have patience with one another while we work out those issues. That's the only request that I have at this point.
And Teresa Vincent, Guilford County, I agree with that. I'm glad you said it. The other thing that I would add to that is hopefully we can submit clear ideas, very practical ideas or suggestions. The other thing I would like for us to emphasize, and I hope it's emphasized, is that this is a fluid process. I mean, it's just as this pandemic, is changing, it's unpredictable. I think that we have to make adjustments, and we may have to roll back some of the expansions that we make, depending on how this pandemic transitions. And so I do think that those are things that need to be considered in terms of the messaging that we send forth to lawyers and the public.
This is Robert Evans. I think this goes to the question, Judge, but in my district, we have struggled. We're 3 counties and we are 3 different courthouses, 3 clerks, a number of judges. And we've had a district that probably, let's take district court, for example, has operated exactly the same way for my 43 years in the district. And I suspect that applies to districts across the state. As tragic as this situation is, I think we also need to communicate somehow that this is an opportunity for districts to reassess and innovate and not be afraid to change what was old to something different. I think there are opportunities in light of this tragedy that every district might want to look at to make themselves more efficient and more relevant, not only to the issue of productivity, but also to how they interface with the public in general. So I think that's one thing we might want to talk about in terms of communicating to the field what this situation and what opportunity it provides anyway for us to look at changing.
Mr. Evans, I agree totally. And I've been harping on that very point to anyone who will listen to me during recent weeks. This is a wonderful opportunity to get rid of some of the archaic but useless customs that we seem to follow in court from time to time. And we've got so many examples of it. The Monday morning calendar call, when we tell hundreds of people to show up at the courthouse at 9:30 or 10 o'clock and wait while their cases are called. The analogy I've used would be if doctors and dentists operated the same way we do in the courthouse, they would tell all their patients every day to show up at 9:30 and to wait in the office until the doctor or dentist was ready to see them rather than having time slots for their appointments. And we should be able to adapt, at least to some extent, to doing the same thing, operating under blocks of time rather than setting up week-long calendars and telling everyone to be there on the same day at the same time. We just got to move away from those old ways of doing things.
Judge?
Yes, sir.
This is Jim Drennan. I do want to say something now, actually. 2 really quick things. In your overall message, I think it's probably really, for me, it would be important to say the ends of what we're about haven't changed at all, but we're being forced to consider the means we get there. And to just double back on what Judge Vincent said, these are decisions that are being made in a time of extreme uncertainty, and those are the hardest decisions you can make. And that means sometimes as things become clearer, then the pathway forward will change. But these are the best decisions that people can make in this time of uncertainty to try to do the things we've always done, which is about providing a system of justice, but being very flexible about the ways to get there, which is really another way of saying what you said. But just to add my emphasis to that I think that in the long run, there's some good things that will come out of this, as well as a lot of tragedy. That's it. Thank you.
And Jim, in that same vein, I know that Judge Sermons has shared this with me already, is perhaps one of the good things that will come of this is it will force those of us who have been in the system for a long time and think we know how to do everything to such an extent that we just rattle through and go through cases perhaps more quickly than we should, to acquire that patience that Kinsley mentioned and slow down our process and take time. Everything is going to take longer under our current situation, which is not a bad thing. We probably should be taking longer with our cases anyway. And so, again, this may be a good opportunity to slow down and take a longer period of time with our cases, as we always should have. Other comments in that vein?
Your Honor, this is John McKee. First of all, thank you to the task force. The recommendations, at least that we've made to the Chief Justice, have been warmly received from NCAJ, the trial bar, the plaintiff trial bar's membership, and they are looking forward to hopefully having some more clarity and certainty with regard to discovery deadlines, depositions, and mediations. And the plaintiff's bar is looking very forward to getting their cases moving. The area that remains a concern for our membership is the trials, and that's been the big subject of what we've talked about today. I've been getting a boatload of phone calls since I got appointed to this committee asking whether people are going to have their trials heard or not. And what I'm hearing from our membership is, again, just a lot of uncertainty and mixed messages. I had one member today tell me that they were told that a trial that's set for early June is going forward in a civil case. I have other people asking about June, July, and I think some of our decisions about prioritization may help guide those decisions. But that's one of the things in terms of clarity and certainty, which you mentioned at the very beginning of the conference, Judge Bridges, are going to be really, really important, at least for the civil bar, to hear when cases may or may not get heard. And I think in terms of prioritization, that there is some valuable materials that we got from some of the other states. I haven't gone through them all. I was asked to focus on Michigan. Michigan wasn't very helpful, but I think Arizona may have some helpful keys for us in terms of setting this prioritization schedule going forward. But again, just letting folks know if their cases are going to be heard or not heard would be really, really important going forward.
This is Patrick Weed. I just want to echo what Mr. McCabe said, as well as Mr. Evans and Mr. West on behalf of the DAs. The feedback that I received initially from criminal defense attorneys was exactly in the same vein. There is a very strong interest in hearing ASAP as to when what we're doing jury trials, when jury trials are set to begin. So I think in terms of messaging and communications, the sooner that we can provide guidance on that, the better. I think that from the criminal defense attorney's perspective, from the feedback I received, our time frame is not exactly the same as what is in the Conference of DA's report, but I think we're all in agreement that that's an important issue that needs to be addressed and given guidance, so we can give guidance on that very soon, or so the Chief Justice can give guidance on that soon. Also, in terms of messaging, like we talked about before, clarity was very important in the feedback I received. And of course, as we talked about earlier today, safety, what we can do to try to our best to ensure the safety of attorneys, of the public, and of jurors once we do get back to that process as well. You know that there'll be jurors out in the public, may or may not have received jury summons for over the summer, who are worried about having to come to the courthouse.
Judge, this is Billy West. Just to really kind of reiterate what Mr. McKay, Mr. Weed said. That's what I've heard from our folks, kind of from a practical point of view, striking that balance between, I think they do want guidance when it comes to jury trials, resuming grand juries, kind of big issues like that. They think it will be better to have a kind of statewide approach of when DAs can begin calendaring trials and grand juries can resume that aren't already in place. However, at the same time, I've talked to my senior resident, Judge Ammons, this morning, and other than those big dates, I think there has to be some deference given to local control, and we've talked about that, about dealing with the local issues. So those are kind of the two things that I've heard, is that, as to the big dates, people are anxious, as we understand, for this task force, or certainly the Chief Justice has the final say to produce those dates, but then allow some type of local control as to how to implement that. But that might be oversimplification, but those are the two things I've heard over and over.
Kelly Myers. Oh, go ahead, Judge Vincent.
Yeah, I wanted to add, in terms of the timeframes that you've indicated that we need to consider, and I think many of us have already use that as a mechanism to dispose of cases in the upcoming month. But we need to address, and I'm hoping that one of the recommendations from the technology committee will be that we incorporate technology that would handle those types of changes, because I think for our criminal traffic calendars, from what I've been told, it's much more difficult to produce a calendar with those time slots. It's much easier in civil. And so I'm hopeful as we make recommendations as it relates to technology, that's one of the things that we will be looking at and recommending to the Chief Justice and AOC.
Thank you, Judge Vincent. Kelly Myers, did you have a comment also?
Yes, sir. It may be much more unpopular with the criminal side, but at least from the civil standpoint, in this messaging and sort of this expecting change, I just think we also need to possibly pull back a little bit from our focus on trials. As we all know, the vast majority of our cases are not resolved through trials, and specifically jury trials. And so I just throw that out there as we think about change and expectations and setting priorities.
Judge Bridges, this is Jay Corpening. I want to circle back to what you were talking about a little bit earlier about things never being the same and perhaps an opportunity to be even better. I've been connected to the National Center for State Courts for getting information, and while we're having this conversation, I got an email from the National Center with a document about remote hearings improving court attendance rates. That in New Jersey, where they did 20,000 hearings in Superior Court scheduled since March 2nd, failure to appear rate dropped from 20% to 0.3% because they were doing mandatory remote hearings. In North Dakota, their appearances for criminal warrant hearings are almost 100% compared to 80% before the pandemic. Michigan saw similar increases. So I think your point's well taken, and that's one of the reasons we've got Chuck Henry chairing this Innovations and Technology Committee.
Thank you, Judge. Are there other comments or concerns of how we go about our communications? We've heard clarity, certainty, and just big issues and local issues. Are there other points?
Yes, sir. This is Jay Corping again, and you and I have talked about this, and Alan Bedore commented about it in the chat. Public health and safety has to be an important part of our messaging, and I think that has to be the lead.
Mm-hmm.
This is Alan Bedore. If I'm not on the task force, but may I say something, Judge Bridges?
Yes, sir.
What Kelly was just talking about, and what the lawyers were saying about the setting expectations on trials, my sense is that most people in Superior Court who are in the system, like those of us on this call, so to speak, kind of understand that we're not probably doing trials until, let's say, August at the earliest, and that we have sessions right now set up for a court, for say civil court or criminal court, either one, and that we have some anticipation that we may use that court time for pleas, motions, and so on and so forth. And I guess what I'm saying is we could be direct about that messaging and saying, look, we can't figure out, say this a little better, but we can't figure out how to do jury trials right now. And it's going to be a little while before we can do them. But here's what we are doing. We are taking care of people's, civil motions, and we're disposing of criminal cases when we can, and, so on and so forth, family law matters, and speak to what we are doing and the service that we can provide the citizens of the state. turn it into a little bit of a positive. We've got more time to spend, to devote to, and I mean, obviously we're not going to be going full sessions all day, every day, but the volume is different, but that we can tackle people's matters and that we're able and willing to do so.
Of course, that comes back to one of the very first points we made at our very first meeting, and that is contrary to a good bit of public opinion, the courts are not closed. The courts are open. We've remained open throughout the process. We're operating under a different schedule, but we are open, and the whole mission of this group is to work on the blueprint for how we move from that being open on that limited basis at the present time to ramping back up to our full operations, taking care of business as fully as we have in the past. Maybe not the same way, but eventually to be back in operation as fully as we were before this came about. So we all need to be mindful of that in our conversations and in our communications. That's what we do. All right. Unless there's some other comment, I believe we will conclude that topic and talk about our next meeting date. I have proposed that we meet again next Thursday, May 21st at 2:00 p.m. So please mark that day and time on your calendars so that you can prepare to attend again.
Judge Bridges?
Yes.
Judge Bridges, I'm sorry, Judge Corpany had asked if we could delay that to 2:30.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I missed that communication. 2:30 rather than 2:00. Thursday, May 21st at 2:30 p.m. One of our principal goals for that meeting will be to have received a significant amount of input from the various work groups and other stakeholders concerning prioritizing our cases and creating our framework for doing that. Judge Corpening, are there other points that you would like to emphasize in preparation for our next meeting?
To the extent that folks have, this is Jay Corpening, I'm sorry, to the extent that folks have time to look at some of those other state reports, that's probably useful. That's a lot of information to have looked at by today. I personally haven't been able to do that, but that would probably be helpful by the time we meet again. I think we've got information from about 8 states, so that'll be helpful.
Bridges, this is Kelly Myers, and I have a question that was posed by our court managers a while back, and may need a little clarification from you. When we are asking them, our working groups and other stakeholders, to set priorities for case types as we expand, are we supposed to identify those priorities based upon the current situation? So knowing that we're not going to have jury trials, that we, at least for some time, I mean, not that we won't, but for some time, that we need social distancing in the courtrooms. Or are we supposed to prioritize based on what we think is most important, no matter what, to get back to business and then figure out how to do that? Does that make sense?
I think I understand what you're asking, Kelly, and that is part of the challenge. We have some competing interests here. We have, in setting priorities for our cases, we have some cases that demand attention. I know, for example, Judge Corpening has mentioned in district court setting, there are certain types of cases that might not necessarily fall in the category of a priority case in the sense that we're looking right now But then it got pointed out that unless those cases were addressed within a specified period of time, there would be some federal funding that would be lost as to those cases. So that in turn bumped those up to a higher priority. But we've got some different parameters or different dimensions in which we're talking about priority, because we have prioritization purely from the standpoint of what needs to be heard. For example, a criminal case in which the defendant is in custody and may have been in custody for more than 200 days, yet that criminal defendant has indicated an intent to plead not guilty and demand a jury trial. So how do we couch that priority? That would normally be a very high priority case, yet we're not able to provide a jury trial for that defendant at this particular time. So we've got to factor both considerations into that in prioritizing, and perhaps identify the priority in two different planes in that regard. And so it causes me to fall back into this mode of phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, and perhaps we can identify different categories of cases that can best be addressed in those different phases of ramping up the court operations, simply because of other considerations that fall into play with those cases, such as the requirement of a jury trial.
Is it useful, I'm assuming yes, but maybe not, to have sort of a column of comments or reasons why our group prioritized something a certain way?
I think so. And the other thing, Kelly, that I found very helpful from the court managers work group, in at least one of the documents I saw from your group, you all had used a color coding system of identifying priorities for different types of cases as low, medium, or high priority. So it might be helpful to consider those priorities, for lack of a better description, not only in terms of priority, that is, need for the case to be heard in a timely manner, but then also in the plane of feasibility. Is it feasible for that case to be heard within an immediate time frame? If we don't have the availability of jury trials, it's not feasible for some of those cases. And I don't know if that helped any or not.
Yes, sir, it does. Thank you very much.
Okay. Judge Corpening, is there anything we've overlooked?
Not overlooked. This is Jay Corpening again. I'll add a response to Kelly. When I asked my work groups to take a look at case priorities, my challenge was, as we expand court operations, what's your priority? And as we expand operations, assuming physical separation within our courtrooms, what are your priorities? And I think they've responded accordingly. There's some things that, you know, when I'm going to be on a call with a child welfare task force tomorrow morning about this, and if you ask a child welfare administrator or expert, everything's a priority, and you can say how it's a priority, right? But then when we've got limited space in our courtrooms and only a certain number of hours in the day, then how do we make it fit? So that was my challenge to them. One of my chiefs has volunteered to start a reboot of the old TV series Night Court, and he said he'd be hairy. So anyway, but that's the only clarification I'll offer, Kelly, to that.
Thank you. That is helpful.
All right. Thank you all very much. I believe we've been in this meeting for about an hour and 50 minutes, so we're approaching our general 2-hour window that we like to conclude by, are there any other matters that need to be considered or come before the group at this time? Hearing nothing further, we will stand adjourned until next Thursday, May 21st at 2:30. I look forward to seeing you all again at that time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.